segment, we're taking a look at the Pew Research poll that showed 52% support nationwide for marijuana legalization. We went over this in the Radical Rant yesterday, and if you want to get more details, you can go back to 420radio.org and check our archives. The rants, the behind the headlines, and the news segments are now all separate videos. You can download them on youtube.com/radicalruss as well. The response I've been waiting for, of course, has been from Kevin Sabet and Project SAM. Been waiting to see what they had to say about this because, of course, Kevin Sabet, for those of you who don't know, is probably the leading spokesperson for the Stop This Marijuana Legalization Train effort. And he posted yesterday Sam's statement on Pew poll on marijuana legalization. And I'll just read it to you in its entirety. It's not very long. This is what they think about 52% of Americans supporting marijuana legalization. Quote, "It is an indication, more than anything, of the careless discussion about legalization currently going on in this country. That discussion is being funded with millions of dollars from those who will profit off of legalization, marijuana's version of big tobacco, as they consistently downplay the harmful effects of marijuana. We owe it to ourselves to have a careful dialogue about the possible downsides of the legalization of marijuana, which includes healthcare costs, car accidents, mental illness, learning dysfunctions, and addiction. I'd like to know how many supporters in that poll realize that marijuana is at least 5 times stronger than it was 20 to 30 years ago, that it is related to emergency room admissions, poor learning outcomes for kids, and car crashes." All right, so that's a statement, and the first thing that caught my eye on this, as it usually does, is this well-funded marijuana legalization lobby, funded with millions and millions of dollars from big marijuana. Can I get some of that? Can we kick down a little here? Well-funded lobby? I got some rent to pay. But I wanted to just address a few of these things on this, because first of all, not only did this poll show 52% support for marijuana legalization, it showed a change from the poll they did in March of 2010 to the poll they did in March of 2013, a change over 3 years of 11 points in support. It went from 41% support to 52% support. And in every single demographic, men, women, white, black, Hispanic, young, old, educated or not, Republican, conservative, independent, tried marijuana, haven't tried marijuana, it didn't matter. In every demographic, support for marijuana legalization went up at least 6 points. In some demographics, as high as 16 or 17 points more support in the span of just those 3 years. Now, what has happened in the span of those 3 years, of course, is we've had statewide votes on marijuana legalization. I've told you for a long time that as long as we're talking about it, we're winning. And we put it on the ballot, even when it fails, we're winning. And if you look back to Prop 19 in California in 2010, and then in 2012 we had Oregon's Measure 80, Washington's I-502, and Colorado's Amendment 64, combined amongst all 4 state campaigns, a total of about $12.5 million were spent. $12.5 million. About half of that was Washington's I-502. Amendment 64 passed with about $1.8 million in campaign contributions. Prop 19 had about $4 million. And Measure 80, we were chronically underfunded. We had less than $500,000 and still got 46.5% support for legalizing as much marijuana as you want, anywhere you want, anytime you want, for any reason you want. Okay, so yeah, we're doing a hell of a job with our output when $12.5 million gets us 2 out of 4 winning elections, doesn't it? Now, compare this to the budgets of the ONDCP. With the ONDCP, going back to 1998, they had the Youth Anti-Drug Media Campaign, which originally appropriated for fiscal years 1998 through 2004 a total of $1.2 billion. That's right, with a B, $1.2 billion over that time. And you remember the ads that came out, the cartoon alien will take your girlfriend and your dog will be upset at you if you smoke pot. You remember all those ads, your egg in the frying pan and, destroying the dishes and all of those ads, which were shown by studies to not work. And in fact, in some demographics of kids actually get more of them to want to try drugs. $1.2 billion they've spent on these advertising programs. Now, their current budget isn't quite that much. It's down to $20 million. So compare the ONDCP which has spent as much as $1.2 billion. And remember, when they were spending that money, there was a big scandal in the early 2000s where some of that money was being spent to surreptitiously input ONDCP propaganda into news programs, into shows like ER, into ESPN Sports Center. Yeah, so with all of that propaganda, the power of the federal government spreading these lies, throughout our news media, for some reason, they can't beat us when we're spending 1% of what they're spending on ad dollars. We've spent $12.5 million. They've spent $1.2 billion, and they can't beat a bunch of stoners? God, that's gotta hurt, Kevin, doesn't it? That's really gotta hurt. And the other thing that's really got to hurt is the fact that now we've got 2 states where marijuana is legal means there are 12 million Americans living somewhere where there's absolutely no punishment for their use of marijuana. And what a terrible example that provides to the other 48 states where there's 26.1 million adults who are smoking marijuana this year who look to their friends in Seattle and Denver and say, well, if they're not getting tested, if they're not getting tickets, if they're not going to jail, why should we? And that's what Project SAM is really fearing here. Not the healthcare costs of marijuana legalization, which, by the way, healthcare costs per cannabis user per year is about $20. They're not really worried about the possibility of people wrecking on the freeways when our freeways now are safer than they have ever been, despite the fact that we now have 18 states where medical marijuana is legal and more people admitting to using marijuana. They're not worried about the children, because if they were really worried about the children, they would be trying to card them, trying to put the marijuana behind counters where it can't be accessed by the children if they were really, really worried about it. No, they're only really worried about one thing: ending that revolving door, that pipeline from the courts to the prisons, to the rehab centers, to the drug testing industries. And Kevin Sabet, I ain't going nowhere. Besides, I got weed.
Damn right we do. And some hash today.
Hash too? All right. Hey, we're going to take a little break. When we come back, we'll have Herb Thrasher on the line and some music from the FNAs.
Oh, have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. Have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. If he said he swam to China, he would sell you South Carolina. Then you know you're talking to that reefer man.
The High Times Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam is recognized as the world's premier marijuana competition.